This is Judges 16 and the end of Samson. Verse 1. Samson went to Gaza and saw there a prostitute and went in to her. Comment: Gaza is a city of the Philistines on the Mediterranean coast. Verse 2. The Gazites were told, Samson is here. They surrounded him and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, Wait until morning light, then we will kill him. Comment: It's not clear whether the Philistines surrounded the prostitute's house or what it was they surrounded, but in addition to that, they set themselves up at the city gate all night to block his exit. Verse 3. Samson lay until midnight, and arose at midnight, and laid hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and plucked them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the mountain that is before Hebron. Comment: There's no mention of any fight, but obviously there was one, and he overcame all the men in the ambush, ripped the city gates off the wall, and carried them to the top of a mountain near Hebron, about 37 miles away as the crow flies. This is more than just the history of Samson. It's God's partial fulfillment of a blessing. In Genesis chapter 24, Abraham's servant went to Mesopotamia to get a wife for Isaac. He found Rebekah there, and when her family was sending her off to marry Isaac, they blessed her, saying, quote, May your offspring possess the gate of those who hate them, end quote. Obviously, Samson is a descendant of Rebekah, and he has literal possession of the gate of his enemies now, so this is a fulfillment of Rebekah's blessing. But it's only partial. Figuratively, to possess the gate of one's enemies means to have power and dominion over one's enemies. Christ was the final fulfillment of the blessing when he defeated Satan at the cross and took authority and dominion over Satan. The risen Christ said, quote, All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth, Matthew 28:18. He possesses the gate of his enemies. Now we come to the beginning of the end for Samson. What his enemies couldn't do to him, he did to himself. Verse 4. It came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. Comment: Samson is from Zorah, which is in the same valley, the valley of Sorek. It's on the edge of Philistine country. We don't know whether Delilah is a Philistine or an Israelite. Samson loved her, it says. Verse 5. The lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, Entice him and see in which his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Delilah said to Samson, Please tell me where your great strength lies, and what you might be bound to afflict you. Samson said to her, If they bind me with 7 green cords that were never dried, then I shall become weak and be as another man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green cords which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had an ambush waiting in the inner room. She said to him, The Philistines are on you, Samson. He broke the cords as a string of tow is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not known. Comment: If Samson didn't have any clue about Delilah before, he should now. He woke up bound. Dead giveaway. This woman is no good. If he had any discernment, he wouldn't have been involved with her in the first place, but he, quote unquote, loves her. We must take control over our passions, or we die. Romans 8:13, quote, If you live after the flesh, you must die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live, end quote. Of course, Paul was mostly talking about spiritual death in life, or we could say eternal death and eternal life. But in Samson's case, his fleshly interest in Delilah will result in his physical death. Delilah sold him out for several thousand pieces of silver. So this history involves 2 of the most common stumbling blocks for men and women, the love of money and uncontrolled sexual attraction. Delilah had the love of money, and Samson the uncontrolled sexual attraction. We must subject our passions and desires to the Spirit of God. Quote, For the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. End quote. We face the extreme and eternal consequences of either letting our passions run wild, which is misery, death, and dishonor, or, on the other hand, subjecting our passions to the Spirit of God, which is peace, honor, and the prosperity of our souls, and eternal life. Paul's shorthand for it was the flesh versus the Spirit. We should let the Spirit of God prevail. Verse 10, Delilah said to Samson, Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me with which you might be bound. He said to her, If they only bind me with new ropes with which no work has been done, then I shall become weak and be as another man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him therewith, and said to him, The Philistines are on you, Samson. The ambush was waiting in the inner room. He broke them off his arms like a thread. Delilah said to Samson, Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me with what you might be bound. He said to her, If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web. She fastened it with a pin and said to him, The Philistines are on you, Samson. Comment: The New Living Translation indicates that Delilah wove Samson's hair into the fabric on a loom and tightened the loom shuttle down on it. Still in verse 14. He awakened out of his sleep and plucked away the pin of the beam and the web. She said to him, How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. When she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, his soul was troubled to death. Comment: She pressed him daily, it says. She's nagging, which means she'll win if he doesn't recognize what's going on and put a stop to it. Verse 17. He told her all his heart and said to her, No razor has ever come on my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will go from me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. Comment: Samson is a Nazirite. To understand the significance of what just happened, we have to understand the duties of the Nazirite from Numbers chapter 6. The Nazirite is separated to the Lord, Numbers 6:2. He must be extremely diligent about fulfilling his duties as a Nazirite, including not cutting his hair, Numbers 6:5. Delilah is obviously treacherous, so Samson has sinned by opening the door to having his hair cut. However, God will still be at work. Verse 18. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he has told me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called for a man and shaved off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him. Comment: She began to afflict him, meaning she's waking him up in a rude manner. Still in verse 19. And his strength went from him. She said, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. He awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he didn't know that Yahweh had departed from him. Comment: His strength went from him, and Yahweh departed from him. His strength was from God, but Samson abandoned his duties as a Nazirite. Verse 21. The Philistines laid hold on him and put out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza. Comment: That's deep within Philistine territory. Still in verse 21. And bound him with fetters of brass, and he ground at the mill in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaved. The lords of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice, for they said, Our God has delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. Comment: The Philistines threw a party to celebrate their victory over Samson. They credit their god Dagon. As we'll find out, there are thousands of people in attendance, and it's being held at a place that could be translated house or temple, probably temple because it's also a place of sacrifice. It's very large to hold so many people, and it's very elaborate with pillars. Must be a temple. Verse 24. When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God has delivered our enemy and the destroyer of our country, who has slain many of us, into our hand. When their hearts were merry, they said, Call for Samson, that he may entertain us. They called for Samson out of the prison, and he performed before them. Comment there, humiliating Samson, commanding him to perform embarrassing tricks. Still in verse 25. They set him between the pillars. Comment, there are two pillars very close together supporting the roof, as we'll see. Samson is standing between them. Verse 26. And Samson said to the boy who held him by the hand, Allow me to feel the pillars whereupon the house rests, that I may lean on them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were on the roof about 3,000 men and women who saw while Samson performed. Samson called to Yahweh and said, Lord Yahweh, remember me, please, and strengthen me, please, only this once, God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and leaned on them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. He bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell on the lords and on all the people who were therein. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than those who he killed in his life. Comment, this is like the Capitol building collapsing with all the government inside. He killed 3,000 of the most prominent leaders of Philistia, which would have crippled them. Verse 31. Then his brothers and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the burial site of Manoah his father. He judged Israel 20 years. Comment, he ended well in an act of faith. His faith put him in the Hebrews' Hall of Faith, Hebrews 11:32. Until the incident with Delilah, he kept his Nazirite duties all his life, the duties assigned him by the angel of the Lord to abstain from grapes and grape products, including wine, and to abstain from cutting his hair. His abstinence was a continuous, lifelong feat of self-control, which was very impressive. Not as dramatic as collapsing the temple, but maybe even more impressive. If his self-control had extended to his love life, things would have been different, but nevertheless, God still worked. That's the chapter. Judges 17 is next at landofhavilah.net. Judges 17. This is the map of Judges 16. Samson was from Zorah. This is modern Zorah in the Sorek Valley. In this chapter, Samson visited a prostitute in Gaza. He overcame the ambush there and carried the gates of Gaza to the top of a mountain overlooking Hebron, a distance of about 37 miles from Gaza as the crow flies. Delilah lived in the valley of Sorek near Samson's home. This is the valley of Sorek. They took Samson to prison in Gaza. He died in Gaza at what was almost certainly the Temple of Dagon. Samson's mother was barren until she had him, but by the end of the history he had brothers. His father and brothers retrieved his body and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol. This is modern Zorah and modern Eshtaol. Judges 17 is next.